From the time the first story was told and the first musical note played, human history has also been the history of the performing arts. But it is also the story of unexpected tragedy, when a night at the movies becomes a nightmare of crushing devastation. And the delight of children under the big top becomes a desperate race for survival on a fiery afternoon when laughter turned to tears. Thursday afternoon, July 6, 1944. In the city of Hartford, Connecticut, the circus is in town. Not just any circus, but Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey.
It was a big deal back then when the circus came to town. They were front page news at that point, and this was the best circus in the world.
Most of the men in Hartford work shifts at local defense plants, which is why many of those coming to the circus grounds this afternoon are women and children.
This was the only matinee performance in Hartford, and this was their one chance to see the circus.
Some have never been to a big top before, including Donald Anderson, who arrives late with his grandparents' handyman, Axel Carlson.
Axel bought the tickets and we went in, and I said, "There are reserve sections over there." He said, "That's all sold out. We got to go up to bleachers."
Donald Anderson would consider Elliott Smith and his sister Joan very lucky. Their mother has splurged for reserved seats in the North Grandstand.
They were pretty good seats. They were about even with the center ring. It was, like the 40-yard line.
To get to their section, the Smiths must cross a barred iron chute that runs out the northwest exit and connects animal performance cages to holding cages outside. A similar chute blocks another exit on the northeast end.
The animal runway was semicircular, like a long tube. And then we went up to our seats, which were folding chairs on tiers of platforms.
Big Bill Curley has saved his gas ration stamps to return home to Hartford to visit his family. He's here with his sister's kids and their friends from the neighborhood. 10-year-old Donald Gale almost couldn't come today.
I was grounded, and so I had to do some fast talking in order to get to go.
Donald Gale and his companions must also climb over the animal chutes to reach their seats at the top of the north side grandstand.
My mom's best friend, named Helga Grant, invited me to go with them. She had a little girl named Caroline and a boyfriend. Well, for a 10-year-old, it was a little overwhelming. It was a huge tent, and there were a lot of side shows going on and a lot of things to see.
It is a huge tent, 160 meters long, 65 meters wide, and 15 meters tall at its highest point, said to be the largest in the world.
The tent had 9 exits. On the north side of the tent, 2 of them were blocked by the animal cages, or the animal tunnels that ran into the cages there. So even though there were 9 exits, there were probably only 3, the 2 by the bandstand and the one which was the entrance, that were large enough to funnel more than, say, 7 or 8 people through at a time.
The interesting thing about that particular tent was that it was a brand new one. So before they went out that March, they waterproofed it. Now during the war, all the good waterproofing materials were gone, so they reverted back to the old days. Prior to 1930, the way they would waterproof a tent, they would take 2/3 wax, paraffin wax, and mix it with gasoline and get this old sticky paste to it and just saturate that canvas with this pasty wax, and then voila, you've got waterproofing.
Fire-resistant tents are available, but they are heavier and take more time to assemble. Time is a luxury the circus does not have, particularly after arriving late in Hartford the previous day.
They were late getting in set up, and that caused a lot of little things like fire extinguishers not to be put into place, and maybe water buckets weren't done right. And then the next day, you just take it for granted that those things got done.
With almost 9,000 paid spectators already in their seats, it looks like it's going to be a successful matinee, despite the summer heat that keeps some customers away. 2:23 p.m. The greatest show on earth is underway.
And they had Joe Walsh that was on the northeast end with his lions and bears in one cage, and then on the other end in ring 3, which is closest to the entrance, they had May Corvair. She had leopards and panthers in that ring. And then right after that, they were going to have the famous Walendas do the wire walking routine.
Another attraction waits in the performer's entrance on the tent's south side. Emmett Kelly, the world's most popular clown.
And he was sitting there meandering around, just waiting for the music for the Carl Walenda family, just waiting for his opportunity to go in, and that's when all the excitement started.
As the two animal acts finish and the Walendas prepare to perform high above the center ring, a few people notice a small spot of flame just south of the main entrance.
There were seat men, ushers, who had noticed the blaze when it was still only about, say, a window-sized fire at that point. But the buckets of water did nothing to stop them. One fire extinguisher would have stopped that fire. But partly because they were late the day before, they were still sitting in a crate.
The flame quickly reaches up the sidewall toward the Big Top's paraffin waterproofing.
The Walendas realized that there was a problem with it and that they had to get down and get down fast. And once they basically sort of scratched their act, the people in the stands were wondering what was wrong.
Somebody hollered, "Fire!" And I looked around, and then I could see it getting bigger and bigger. And all hell let loose.
Thursday, July 6th, 1944. In Hartford, Connecticut, an afternoon performance of the Ringling Brothers' Barnum and Bailey Circus is turning into a fiery disaster. A fire in the southwest corner of the tent shoots quickly up the sidewall, licking at the paraffin-soaked canvas roof.
It was just like a tornado was behind it. It just was very intense, and it just came up extremely fast, and it just swept right across us, went over our heads, and just kept right on going.
Almost 9,000 people rise in their seats, most heading down the grandstands toward the Big Top floor.
On the better seats, which were sort of in the middle, were actually chairs that you could sit on. But these chairs were not nailed down. So once the fans started getting out of their seats and panicking, those chairs piled up and tripped people.
Up in the bleachers, young Donald Gale can see the bottleneck at the base of the grandstand and wants to go the other way.
I was going to try to, say, jump down between the bleachers and go out under the tent. But the gal that I was with, Helga, said she would like me to stay with her because she felt responsible. So she took my hand and led me down the bleachers and then into the folding chair section.
On the other side of the tent, Elliott Smith's sister Joan has the same idea as Donald Gale, but is able to act on it.
My mother grabbed me by the hand and was leading me out the way the ushers were telling everybody to go. Because at 7 years old, I came up to people's waists. So I couldn't see where we were going. Everyone wanted to get out, pushing, shoving, clawing, screaming.
A flood of fleeing customers heads for the main entrance, even though the area overhead is solid flame. Some head out an exit on the tent's south side, where clown Emmett Kelly tries to help.
He was trying to keep them orderly coming out of that center exit, and it just got to the point where they were swarming him, and everybody's going every which way loose, so the crowd pretty much pushed him out of the exit back outside the tent.
Panic does set in, and that was the case here. People just couldn't get away from the fire fast enough.
Throughout the tent, younger and weaker spectators are pushed aside by those bigger and stronger. Helga Grant tries to help Donald Gale out of a tangle of chairs and doesn't see the man in uniform coming her way.
Some sailor who had panicked, big, heavy man, was fighting his way through the crowd with his elbows and fists and pushing and knocking people out of his way so he could go. And he hit her a good blow, knocked her down. And then I can remember scrambling around trying to get up and get moving, but it's just like water moving. They were just all pushing in one direction. You had no choice about where you were going.
In the northwest corner, Donald Anderson sees that his only way out is over the side of the bleachers, not far from where he and handyman Axel Carlson are sitting.
I grabbed a hold of the bleacher right in front of me, so it was a second from the top, and I hung there and dropped down. And there was no way to get out because the animal cage was there and the next exit was too far away. I knew that. Then I remembered I had a nice knife with me. So I used the knife and I cut a hole in the tent, and I got out, and all of a sudden it dawned on me, hey, where the hell is Axel? I had to make another hole to get back in because people were pouring out of that first hole I made. And when I went back in, there was a young little girl there, somebody had trampled on her. And Axel was there, and I said, let's get out this way. So we followed this bunch of people out. We went out again.
The fire continues to flow like a wave across the roof, gnawing at center poles and guy wires. Many of those still inside rush for the two exits at the east end of the tent.
And when they get to the other end, it's all bottlenecked, and so naturally people are going to try and get out any way they can. So some of them tried to cut to the left, right where the animal chutes were.
There was only one tiny wooden stairway over them. And once people started smacking into that runway, they piled up. And if you were a kid caught in those piles, there was no way you were going to get out. Bill Curley, one of the few young, fit men there, straddled the chute and would take children from one side and basically grab them and then throw them over, and saved many children that day.
Unfortunately, one of them is not Elliott Smith, still trapped on the wrong side of the chute.
My hand was torn out of my mother's grasp, and I was swinging fists trying to get some room to navigate, to move, but I was just being swept along. And then finally I got knocked down, and then people started landing on top of me, and the screaming was still going on.
Hot paraffin falls in sizzling globs, burning hair, clothes, and bare skin. Huge pieces of flaming canvas rain down.
The tent itself burned, and once it lost tension, the poles fell, and the whole thing came down on top of a lot of people.
It is as if the doors of hell have been opened as fire devours everything in its path. Outside, circus personnel and survivors can hear the terrible sound of people dying. It is a sound that Emmett Kelly will never forget.
There were screams of mercy, there were screams of mommy, there were screams of little children that he could hear screaming, crying, yelling.
Donald Gale and Elliott Smith are getting a taste of that horror firsthand, both trapped under separate piles of people.
I could feel the weight of the people on top of me, and I could hear the people screaming and praying. And then the screaming stopped, and then the praying stopped.
Hartford, Connecticut, Thursday, July 6, 1944. In less than 10 minutes, the biggest big top in the world has become smoking earth. There is very little fire for arriving firefighters to fight.
When they were first rolling up, I'm sure it was a horrific sight because most of the structure was down by that time, and they had people everywhere. And the first things that they want to do is try to save lives and rescue people.
There are very few to rescue. The dead are everywhere, burned beyond recognition.
Most of the dead were found at either of the two runways on the north side.
Firefighters hose down the heaps of charred flesh, searching for anyone who might be alive. Under one of those piles, 10-year-old Donald Gale regains consciousness.
When I came to, the fire department was there, and they were pouring water on the fire with great intensity. So I had to put my hand up under my nose so that the water would run down my hand so that I could get air to breathe. I don't know whether I yelled or what, but they soon found me. The tent was gone, and there were bodies all over the place.
Under another pile of bodies next to the animal chutes, 7-year-old Elliott Smith never loses consciousness.
After a while, I could hear this spray of water from firemen's hoses. So I called to them.
Bodies at the chutes are fused together like chunks of black coal. Firefighters must break them apart to get to Elliott Smith.
I could feel the weight release off me as they lifted the bodies.
Elliott is taken to the hospital. His sister Joan is found on the circus grounds.
She just happened to be spotted by one of our neighbors who took her home. So she had gotten out virtually unhurt, unscratched.
Donald Anderson is also safe, but determined not to talk about his experience.
I got out of there safely. Handyman got out safely. What's there to talk about?
Despite his modesty, Donald is given a medal for bravery for saving the lives of the 300 people who escaped through the holes he cut in the tent wall. The final death toll is 168 people, almost all of them women and children. 1/4 of the victims die next to the animal runways. Big Bill Curley, who helped so many children escape, is one of them.
Unfortunately, he was still there when the tent came down on top of him, and he died in the fire.
Helga Grant, the woman who invited Donald Gale to the circus that day, is also dead, unable to escape after being struck down by the panic-stricken sailor.
Carolyn and Helga's boyfriend, they managed to get out without a scratch. If we'd have stayed together, I guess we would have probably all got out. But they seemed to have gone one way, we went another. Helga didn't have a chance to get too far.
Frantic families now search for missing loved ones at the hospitals or at a temporary morgue set up in the local armory.
My father that day had gone to the armory, and he had been walking up and down the rows looking for my mother, my sister, or myself. And a volunteer came to him and said, "We found your wife, is this her purse?" And he said, "Yes." So, he went over to the hospital. My mother was able to walk on out, but pieces of the burning tent fell on her, so she was burned on her upper arms and her shoulders and the top of her head, so that she had to wear a wig for the rest of her life.
Her son, Elliott, remains in hospital for the next 5 months, undergoing extensive surgery to repair his terribly burned body.
Well, I have burns on my right hand and one starting on my side, goes across my lower back and all the way down the backs of my thighs.
Elliott Smith shares a room with Donald Gale, who must also undergo painful surgery. His head and both arms are terribly burned, his hands fused into lumps. It will be 6 months before Donald Gale can go home. An official inquiry reveals that circus firefighting equipment that should have been standing by was never put in place.
That was part of the negligence charge, that they hadn't put the fire extinguishers out when they really should have. The other part, of course, was the canvas itself, which was obviously a huge hazard.
Ultimately, 6 circus managers are charged with involuntary manslaughter and serve less than a year in prison. The circus accepts full responsibility for the fire, devoting its profits for the next 10 years to pay liability to families of the victims. While the original inquest determines that a smoldering cigarette started the blaze, some believe it was arson.
In the early 50s, a drifter named Robert Dale C.G. confessed to the circus fire. He had been working that time on the light crew on the show, and he was a very young man and very disturbed. But these claims could not be verified.
Whatever the cause, the tragedy in Hartford brings important changes to fire laws and codes. The circus salvages the rest of the 1944 season, but plays in open stadiums.
That was really shades of things to come, because it wasn't soon thereafter that they started going into the Coliseums and started avoiding the tent because they had such bad memories from the fire of Connecticut.
No one in Hartford is left untouched by the tragedy of that July afternoon in 1944, the day laughter turned to tears.